Hey guys, this evening we'll start with something a little more dark. A time of plagues, punishments, and stew. We will plunge in what life was really like in the Middle Ages. Forget about the castles and chivalry that Hollywood sold them. The truth is that they probably wouldn't last, not a single day. That's how it is. Indiko, Ina, that before they put. If you're comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really want to enjoy what do here. And tell me in the comments from where else they tune in and what time is it for you. It's always fascinating. See who will join us from any part of the world. Now, dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's begin. Together, calmly, this trip evening. Congratulations, you've just woken up in year 1325. The good one, the news is that are alive. The bad news is that the fleas are too. Your bed is a half-rotten straw mattress, full of bugs and hay, which it smells like barn soil because it was a while ago, 3 months. No foam, viscoelastic, no pillows, and lots of them less cotton sheets, Egyptian. Just a wool blanket that has not been washed from winter past, and that now weight more or less as a cow small because of the filth accumulated. You wake up blinking at the sound of the church bell in the distance. It's the medieval version of an alarm clock, only further strong and in some way even less merciful. Your house is a one-room log cabin without windows and a charming space open where your family, the cattle, and the insects domestic share same space. The smell, it's a symphony fragrant, a subtle, a mixture of stale beer, human sweat, goat, and something else. You pray it's not mold, but that in your soul probably isn't. The candles aromatic, they have not yet invented, and even if they were, they simply melt in dirt floor. You try stretch, but you regret it instantly because the air is freezing, and your joints hurt. You have 22 years. That in terms medieval is more or less the median age. Your spine creaks as a old wooden door, and your knees sound like a sack of stones shaken by a confused farmer. Getting out of bed is a bit risky. The ground this wet because of last night's rain, which seeped through thatched roof or crusty roof for something that the neighbor's chicken made it. Anyway, your bare feet now form part of the ecosystem. Oh, and privacy. What's that? Your whole family and stuff. Once an unknown cousin that never left, they wake up to your side. There is no bedroom, nor curtains, nor time for yourself. Just you, in community. Welcome to the morning in medieval Europe, where never are really just because parasites, rodents, and others. 8 people always their company, and that's how begin your day. From here on out, it only gets worse. So that you have achieved, get out of your medieval barn of horrors. Congratulations. Now, nature calls, and it doesn't call politely. It's screaming. This is where you begin to miss bathroom modern. There is no toilet, no seat, no paper hygienic, neither cistern, nor not even a plunger, slightly resentful on the corner. In the century 14, urinating was an adventure, a social experiment, and often a small event public. If you are a farmer, your bathroom it's probably a wooden cube behind the house, which already this full because Uncle Wolfstan had a bad night after eating turnips. It's in bad shape. The smell is biblical. You hold your breath, your needs, and then here comes the surprise. You throw it out on the street. Yes, on the street, supposedly, that you must yell something like "Gardilou" before throwing it through the window. That's in French ancient means care, down. Although frankly nobody moves enough, fast. City streets, medieval ones, are sewers open. A charming river of waste humans, excrement animals and liquids, mysterious that you would prefer not to examine. If you are lucky enough to live in a village with latrines public, congratulations. You can sit down shoulder to shoulder with strangers in a latrine, where privacy is a myth and ventilation a joke heavy. You can chat a little, but try not to breathe too much. Deep. Toilet paper. I'd never seen it before. Ear. Most people clean their ears with straw, leaves, rags, moss, or, if they feel like it, a piece of wool. Sometimes, nothing. What could explain by that the handshakes were not yet popular, and if are in a castle, safe, which is better, right? Well, sort of. Maybe that have a guard latrine, a hole on the wall that leaves fall your waist directly in he mode. Great idea, except that your enemies know it. And yes, the attackers sometimes they entered by he, drain, hole. What an entrance through the door, rare. That's it, whether you're a farmer or a baron going to the bathroom. In medieval times, it was a ritual of humiliation. It does. Cold, public, dangerous, and always disgusting. A slip up on a wet stone path, and you stumble face to face with the dregs of humanity, and you haven't even brushed them yet, the teeth. But already, we'll talk about that. You survived the bathroom. You deserve a reward, right? Perhaps a good one. Breakfast. Something warm, delicious, comforting. I'm sorry. This is medieval Europe. There's nothing comforting here. Breakfast, if you can even call it that. Called thus, it is a matter gloomy. No eggs Benedict, no coffee makers. That sizzle, and sizzle a lot. Less avocado toast. You feel or you bend down near the fire with a wooden bowl that seems pulled out of a muddy boot. Welcome to your ration, daily recipe for stew. Stew is a thick and sticky stew, made with what you might find grains, tubers, perhaps nails. How many? Lucky legumes. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, sometimes weeks, and the new ingredients they are simply added to the old. It's less a recipe and more an ongoing edible experiment. Beside it, a piece of bread so hard that could divert arrows. It is made from coarse rye or barley flour, often bulked with sawdust, acorns ground, or other ingredients creatives, because wheat is a rich man's fantasy. This bread is not your friend. You don't cut it, you bargain with it. And what about the drinks? You're not drinking orange juice or an oat milk latte. You are drinking beer. Yes, beer. At 6 in the morning. Why? Because he water this full of parasites and filth. Then, you begin your day with a mild, low, alcohol, high beer survival capacity. Children drink it too. It doesn't affect anyone. Happy, but at least you don't will kill immediately. Do you want some meat or cheese? Keep dreaming. That's for the Sundays and Saints' days, and only if you, sir, feels generous. Most farmers don't eat meat more than a few times a year. Few times a year. As for fresh fruit, only when this in season and not be already fermented in wine, and you don't even notice. Occur. Think in spices, less, that your royalty. A pinch of pepper costs more, that you salary monthly. Salt is so valuable that you keep it under lock and key, like that chew your sandy bread. You drink, you down your medieval beer in one gulp, and try not to think in the rat that could have nibbled your gruel. At night, breakfast doesn't give you energy. It's simply tea. It happens. And now that I'm malnourished, it's time to work as you life. It depended on it, because undoubtedly depends. So that already you have eaten your sad medieval breakfast, and now it's time to get dressed. Not that, it's gonna be useless. Your closet consists in just one garment. One. It's a rough wool tunic or a linen dress that you have used all the days for months, perhaps years. There's no such thing as seasonal fashion. You just have to wear this until it disintegrates or you have an infection by fungal infections. Underwear is optional. Hopefully, that's it. Time, a linen tunic below. If not, well, you'll see on the skin, under layers of wool rough and sweaty, lovingly sewn by someone that probably didn't have. I have no idea how it was supposed to work. There's no sewing machine either. Soap, nor only one dry cleaner in sight. That's it. That you clothes, this stained, stiff, and smells as a compost pile marinade in a pigsty. Even would you like washing it isn't easy. You would have that bring water from a river, or, well, heat it over a fire. Scrub you tunica about a board with ash, or lie down and hang it in the sun, which comes out approximately 3 days a year. And don't even get me started on shoes, if you have. Some are made of untreated leather, barely stitched, and offer both arch support and a banana peel. Most farmers simply go barefoot. By the mud, the manure, the mines, terrestrial, medieval, that is, rocks, sharp edges, and pools of disease. All of this means a thing. Your fur tee. It hates it. It itches you constantly. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live there. In your body. They have nobles, monks, disgusting, itchy children, insect breeding grounds, street vendors. Nobody is safe. You will scratch your armpit with a wooden spoon while talk to the local priest, and nobody will bat an eye. You have the skin raw from so much rubbing against you, your skin scalp, a battlefield of bites. And if you get a rash, what a shame. There's no dermatologist, nor hydrocortisone, nor nobody that say that. It's probably scabies. You're still suffering. And if you are lucky not to contract a infection, great. That rash will accompany during the next 6 months as an unwanted medieval companion. Now that are dressed in misery and wrapped in discomfort, it's time to get out and start working until I die. Now that our completely itchy wool dress, it's wet. It's time to show that smile morning, except that you don't, because in the Middle Ages, smiling was a dangerous game, not emotionally, but dentally. There was no toothbrush, toothpaste, or rinse oral, nor dental floss. The concept of hygiene oral was as popular as bathing, that is, not much. Some could chew a twig or rinse with wine or vinegar, but in general, the teeth, they were alone and they weren't doing well. By the time you arrive at the 20-something, you smile, it seemed taken from a crypt, bewitched. Cavities proliferated, the gums were inflamed, and they weren't just food stains on the teeth. That was cavities. You had more cavities in the mouth than a medieval root merchant. Sugar, though I wasn't there yet in everywhere, it was returning further common among the wealthy. It was imported at a high price. It was used mostly in small cakes or to show off wealth. If you are noble, congratulations. You rot the teeth further fast than to the peasants. If you are, poor man, you'll do it little by little, with leavened bread, porridge, gritty teeth, and years of hard chewing. Toothaches, get used to it. They're like medieval climate, always present. The type of pain that tea does consider. Pray, drink, or get your tooth pulled you even with pliers. And I'm not kidding. That was the real treatment. Dentists didn't exist. Really. But the surgeons, barbers, yes, the same guy that shorty hair too, this taking out the molars, extracted by candlelight with an iron hook, and without anesthesia. Infected tooth. I hope that I like the fever. Because without antibiotics, it can become easily in sepsis and give you a terrible toothache. That's right, the same. That us sends a pharmacy today could be your funeral century 14, and there is no relief either. In social sphere, kissing, good luck. Halitosis, bad breath, is in everywhere. If you are single, don't judge by you. Smile. You are being judged by your land and your livestock. In short, your mouth is a battlefield, and it is losing the war. Now that they hurt the teeth. Let's go out, because you true work, it will break your back. Barely. It begins. Time to go to work. Except that there is no office, no desk, no coffee break, nor opportunity for advancement. Your job, if are as 90% of the population, it's simple. Don't die working for someone's comfort. More, you're a farmer. Congratulations. That means that you work the land that belongs to a gentleman that probably doesn't remember your name. You get up with the sun, and you only stop when disappears behind the trees. Your tools, one wooden hoe, a sickle rusty, and the bones that still remain intact in your body. There is no weekend. There is no need to clock in. It's only from sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week. Sunday is off, but only if you're not there, harvesting, fighting off assailants, or praying feverishly so that your finger, the infected foot, stop turning black. The work is brutal. The fields are plowed by hand or with oxen, if you are enough rich, as if you could afford one. You dig trenches, you sow seeds, you pull them up weeds and debris water until your spine is starting to look like the letter S. Nobody cares. Are tired. Nobody asks, as this you. Mental health. If you are a woman, surprise. You don't just do field work, you also take care of the children. You clean, cook, spin, wool. You feed the animals and pretends that your lice infestation husband is not slowly migrating to your side of the bed. The children begin to help around the 5 years. No school, no toys, just a little wooden rake, and the I dream of one day not dying of the flu. And if are you one of them few, if you're not a farmer, maybe you're a blacksmith, tanner, or cooper, great, you still work with fire and other products, chemicals or animal viscera all the day in poorly ventilated sheds. The pay, basically, survival. The advantages, hemorrhages occasional, breaking a bone. What, too bad. Your fever rises, you drink warm beer, and you keep going. Go ahead. You can't allow you stop, nor not even for a day, because if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, well, medieval Europe had a base solution to that. Is called being replaced. That you grab the shovel, ignore the blisters, and keep going. Digging. Because in the Middle Ages, your work is not a career. It's a slow motion endurance test. Now that tea, my back is burning by working less. Talk about the weather in the countryside. Because in the Middle Ages, the temperature has less that see with the seasons and more with the continuous punishment from heaven. Let's begin. By winter. There is no insulation, nor no central heating, no double glazing, just wooden walls with gaps. By that you could throw a chicken, the windows covered with cloth, not glass. The fire in the fireplace, in theory, is nice, but you don't have enough firewood to keep it going on because wood is expensive and sometimes illegal. Pick it up from the forest. Yes, they can execute by take the wrong stick in the wrong forest. You keep warm with your unique wool tunic wet. You snuggle near the embers moribund, and even so tea. You wake up with your nose frozen, the feet permanently cold, often damp. Fingers so stiff that they seem small medieval poles. Frostbite isn't diagnosed, it's simply called bad luck. Now, let's move on to summer. Sounds better, right? Wrong. In summer, your house becomes in a clay oven. You sweat through the layers, but you can't take them off because show too much. The skin is scandalous, and moreover, invites burns, solar heat, insect bites, and social judgment. Flies, they walk by everywhere, attracted by you unwashed body, and by his smell of this week's goat stew pass that still ferments in a corner. Mosquitoes buzz near you ear while you sleep, assuming that you can, sleeping with your screams neighbors and the weeping of the babies. In the countryside, the sun, it burns. Without sunscreen, without a hat, unless that tea you have made of straw, like a scarecrow desperate. And the worst part is that still have that work. Heat stroke is simply called to take a bad turn, so that, or you are trembling in your own refuge, wondering, your toes make it to spring, or are you sweating through your single pair of socks while your thighs rub together until I forget? And the only thing that It never changes, regardless of the season, it's just that clothes go on. While snacking, the food continues being terrible and your next job go on. Waiting, welcome to temperature control, medieval style. There is none. Are you thirsty? Do you need to refresh yourself? I'd like some water on the face to wake up from this wet and feverish dream of your life. What a pity. In medieval times, the water is not your friend. Try kill you in silence. Let's start with the drinks. The nearby stream. It looks fresh, bubbly, and crystal clear, like taken from a fantasy film. But, spoiler alert, it isn't. Upriva someone, he just threw away a chamber pot. And if it wasn't that, it was probably a pig, dead, be decomposing in him. Parasites, bacteria, and everything. A army, microbial of medieval Europe, lurking in every sip. That's why he drank beer. Yes, beer, even the children. But before imagining the children medieval drinking barrels, understand that was a light, weak beer in alcohol, strong in survival. Brewing beer boiled he water, so that was further safe than any stuff that flowed through the village irrigation ditch. The wine was another matter, option, if you were enough rich, as if to allow it, and not you worried to work well before noon. And the bathroom, it was probably used water for cleaning. In theory, yes. In practice, absolutely not. You see, in that, so people I believed that take a bath, open the pores, and left enter diseases. That's right, washing was considered medically risky. Apparently, you were further clean if you removed the cape dirt protector that had covered the skin. The baths, public, they existed, but they quickly gained a reputation as places of gossip, scandals, and sometimes genuine violence. Activities, extracurricular activities, medieval. Thus that naturally, the church intervened and closed many. Even you wanted bathing was quite a spectacle. You had that go, and find water to the well, boil it over the fire, fill a wooden tub that it was dripping, and then praying that nobody further I'll use it at home before you, or worse, even after. And the rainwater, accumulated in barrels open where the birds they defecate, the insects reproduce, and the moss, it thrives. It sounds refreshing, isn't it? Like this, that, whether in the mouth, in he body, or in the crops. The water in the Middle Ages, it was less a source of life and more a bet, risky. A drink, in false, and you raisins the last few days, sweating on a bed of straw, holding on his stomach, and reflecting about all your decisions vital. The next time that drink, tap water provides by our ancestors. They had no the luxury of hydration without danger, so that you drank water. Or maybe not. Maybe you just, you hit toe with a rock shaped like disappointment. Anyway, you're there, sick. You need help. You need a doctor. What a shame. That live in the Middle Ages, where medicine was in reality only one torture educated with a degree in theology. Let's begin with the diagnosis. Everything that it happens, whether it's a cough, a rash, a broken bone, or the plague, stealthy, it is due to an imbalance in your humors. The 4 humors were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and bile black. According to medieval science, your health, it depends on keeping them balanced, like a kind of internal soup. Do you have fever? Too much? Blood? The answer? A bloodletting. That's right. Let's drain it. You life force in a bowl, wearing a dull blade or a leech hungry. And yes, the barbers. They used to be that they did. Imagine that tea cut, hair and tea. They extract the hemoglobin in just 1 session. 2 for 1. Darling, feeling sad or anxious? That's clearly too much bile. Black. The cure, laxatives. Maybe a lukewarm herbal purge or just prayers and a compress cold while all avoid They make eye contact with you and begin to carve. You coughin'. Now yes, you break a bone or you do a wound. You're ugly, in serious trouble. There's no anesthesia. Unless that count, you'll faint from the pain. The surgery is done with knives that have not cleaned since the Crusades. Tools are heated in the fire, not to sterilize them, but because they give more fear. So, antibiotics, they are centuries apart. The theory of the germs, it hasn't been invented yet. They believe that diseases, they come from the air, vitiated, or that God gets angry with your moral failings. Do you hurt see stomach? There must be been your thoughts sinful. I hope that tea like confess while you vomit. If you condition, it gets worse. They will deal with more leeches, possibly some beetles crushed, and a priest to your side tea will give the last aid by. Yeah, perhaps. At this point, they are preparing for the known cure, like death. And if by some miracle tea you recover, all assume that God took pity on you. The doctor attributes it to himself, all he merit, and the leech, it rises. Thus that, yes, in the Middle Ages, medicine was treated less about curing and more about surviving the cure. After a long day of work, lice, and leeches, finally, it's lunchtime. You return to your room with the stomach roaring, ready for the one and only happiness that tea is left over. In life, a hot meal. Bad news, your meal is probably this, trying to kill you. Let's begin. For the basics. Food preservation, it doesn't really exist. There's no refrigerator, nor freezer. Just salt, smoke, or the hope that the air wintry keep things fresh. Your meat, if you're lucky to have it, it's been hanging there for days, covered in flies, marinated in a brine doubtful and possibly shared with 1 or 2 rats. Bread is the cornerstone of the medieval diet, but neither, not even, that's for sure. In years of bad harvests, desperate farmers fill it with bark, sawdust, or even clay to stretch it. And if it's rye season, there's an advantage. Ergot, a fungus. It causes seizures, hallucinations, and sometimes death. It's like eating bread mixed with substances, psychedelics, and tetanus. Vegetables, only if they're in season. And you know what's always in season? Turnips. Lots of turnips. Boiled in puree or floating in stew. That, if you remember from the previous chapter, it's basically a hot swamp of ingredients mysterious that has been simmering from your funeral great-grandfather. Ken, that is fruit in autumn, but it rots fast. And the sugar is scarce, expensive, and the rich hoard it to show off their teeth blackened. Dairy products are another bet risky. Fresh milk spoils in hours. Butter and cheese are better, but are full of bacteria. People, he eats them all. Modes, because frankly, it's that or chewing. P, the leather of your boot. And let's talk about seasonings. Spices, like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg. They're worth more than gold. For the average peasant, the flavor. It comes from onions, salt, hopefully, and pain. Most meals, they know to burlap wet, spilled with sadness. But food isn't just a health hazard, it's a danger. Politician. The game animals belong to the Lord, not to you. If you catch hunting, poaching a rabbit could result in a fine, imprisonment, or even done. That's right. Your dinner could do that tea. Hang them. That's how it is. That. While tea. Sit down to eat your grey stew by the flickering firelight. Remember that every bite is a risk. But you eat everything. Ways. Because in the Middle Ages, food didn't nourish you. It tested you. It's already night. You've worked, suffered, and barely digested anything. You suspicious stew. You could think that the day is coming to an end, but don't you relax too much, because God you this looking. Also the priest and also you neighbor Inez, who tea will betray. Yeah, tea you lose mass. In medieval Europe, religion wasn't just a part of life. It was life. Same. The church controls you, calendar, your laws, your education. If you know how to read, you, birth, marriage, death, and everything in between. Think about it. In she as you home spiritual, and always are behind with the rental. Each day is structured in around the prayer bells. The village church bell rings, in the morning, at midday, and at night. Not because people need reminders, but because skipping prayer is a sin, forgetting due reverence, sin, eating meat on a Friday, sin, think in your wife neighbor, in that dream, a double sin. Vividly real. Priests describe it with glorious detail, rivers of fire, lakes of blood boiling, demons with pitchforks and wailing eternal. If the plague doesn't affect you, it frightens the condemnation eternal. Yeah, you cannot read the Bible because this written in Latin, a language reserved for monks, clergymen, and that noble child who's too good for earth. You depend on the church for that. I'll interpret it for you. Everything. That means he priest says that you harvest. If it failed, it's because you didn't pray enough. Well, it's time to get on your knees more. Or force, tithes, a 10th part of everything that you possess. They are mandatory. If you grow wheat, you give wheat. If you raise hens, you lay eggs. If you have nothing, congratulations. You are spiritually in bankruptcy and financially condemned. The holidays are holy days, dozens of them, and although offer breaks from work are not for leisure, therefore, attending Mass, fasting, and confession are essential. 2 sins, and remind you, same, that joy is a indulgence, dangerous. Questioning the church is dangerous. They burn the heretics, they drown witches, they flog the blasphemers and reformers quickly to the skeptics, so that you follow he procedure. You sing, you bow, you pray that your soul, after bear this life, dirty, finally I reached paradise, assuming I hope the priest likes you. Because in the Middle Ages, God could be merciful, but the church, not so much. If you were thinking being a medieval peasant was hard, try to be being woman. All the dirt, the hunger, and the fear, in addition to the childbirth, servitude, and social invisibility. In the Middle Ages, being a woman was like being hard mode, without health potions, neither reset button. From he birth, the path of a little girl is practically defined. To get married young, to have children, serve their husband, to die, tired. Education, unlikely. Unless that you are from a noble family and you send you to a convent, development intellectual stops when you learn to beat butter and mend a tunic. The marriage is early. Very early. It's not unusual to be committed to 12 and pregnant at 14. It's not about love. It's about land, cattle, and alliances. No requirement, your opinion. Once married, you are basically property of your husband. Your job is to produce heirs, feed everyone, keep the house running, and don't complain. Because complain could do that tea. Label her as grumpy or worse. Even now, like a witch. That label, it comes with drowning or a courtesy burning, according to local fashion. Giving birth is a lottery of death. There is no prenatal care, no sterile instruments, no anesthesia. Midwives do what they can, but even the complications further mild, they can to signify the death of the mother, the child, or both. Some women survive 10 pregnancies. Many don't either. They survive. But don't you. Don't worry. One time that born he baby, your job it increases. Now, you have a baby that cries in a hut full of lice, and it is expected that you breastfeed him, cook for him, clean for him, and that follow helping in the field. You don't get a break. You are a break for everyone that besides. If you're not married, you are suspicious. If you are widow, vulnerable. If you're outspoken, dangerous. Women, those who were not satisfied, were often accused of witchcraft, especially, they had knowledge of herbs, a personality strong, or simply they were looking to someone. A rainy Tuesday is rare. Even in the church, paper is limited. The nuns, they lived under rules, strict, prohibited, speaking without permission, without freedom of movement, and your spiritual worth always classified by under men. In short, if you were a woman in the Middle Ages, it was expected that you would endure, you would obey, you reproduced, and suffered in silence, ideally smiling, because even in a time of universal suffering was expected that women suffered with dignity. So far, You have fought against dirt, the hunger, social injustice, and possibly a goat. But just when do you think that your days see ya? Then things get worse. Then violence arrives. Loud, bloody, and often completely acceptable to the standards medieval. Let's be clear, the Middle Ages were not peaceful. The idea of law and the order meant mostly wait, that he, the local gentleman, wasn't in a bad mood. The violence, this in everywhere. In the home, in the streets, in the battlefield, in the disputes, churches, and sometimes in the queue at the communal bread oven, crime is common. The punishment is brutal, and justice is even worse. Arsenic. That protection. If you steal a loaf of bread, you could lose a hand. If tea, they accuse you of lying. Could you piercing your tongue? If gossip too much, you find with the nagging bridle. A metal mask strapped to the head, with a bar over the mouth. To correct, by supposed, let's say that tea, they accuse him of something serious. Heresy, theft, witchcraft. How? Evidence your innocence. Being tortured. Obviously. Welcome to the trial. By ordeal. One version. You put your hand in water boiling to remove a stone. If it heals without infection in 3 days, you are innocent. If not, you're guilty. Another option. They throw you into a river. If you sink, you are innocent, and probably you are dead. If you float, you are guilty, and you will be punished by all modes. It's like a medieval contest where the prize is survival, and the presenter is supporting actively. And if they sentence someone to death, it's an event public. The executions are carried out facing crowds that cheers, hangings, beheadings, burnings. Sometimes he brings sandwiches. He is the medieval equivalent of television via cable. The violence domestic use is completely normal. Husbands were allowed, even expected, to. They would discipline their wives and children. The fights streetwalkers are common, could hit only by to look askance at a nobleman's horse. And war, always latent. Local disputes, territorial, crusades, religious. There's always someone marching to stab to other in name of honor, God, or the boredom. Violence is not a breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It's society. We all live with the constant conviction that life is fragile, justice arbitrary, and that your neighbor could break your head over a pig. Like that walk carefully, lower your gaze, and never trust in no one with a club. To our heights, you have surpassed the lice, leeches, naked misery, and the impending threat of disembowelment public. But now arrives the final chapter of most lives medieval, a death premature and unglamorous. If you're still alive and breathing after the 40, you are practically a celebrity. Even could call you the old man, which is less a nickname and more a miracle. Statistical. Let's analyze it. Average life expectancy is around the 30 or 40 years, but that figure is seen seriously affected due to mortality children. Almost half of the children. They died before reaching their full age, the 5 years. Illness, malnutrition, or a harsh winter were enough. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope. If you survived childhood, you reached old age. Adult, already exhausted. Work, it was beginning in as much as one could walk upright. Already the 25, the joints creaked like the gate of a monastery. It could too lack several teeth, a finger, and much of his original optimism. Women faced a challenge particularly deadly, the childbirth. It was one of the main causes of death for women medieval. Without painkillers, without intervention, medical, just prayer, hot water, and someone that he would hold their hands while they bled out on a cot stuffed with straw. For men, the dangers were different, but likewise relentless. Accidents, agricultural infections, by wounds, mild. The anger of a neighbor, by be drunk. A crusade that was falling apart. Even walking to the market could be risky if he happened to cross paths with a bored bandit or a tax collector angry. Death could also arrive silently because of the plague, which it transformed the cities in cemeteries overnight, or because of famine, which could span seasons, entire devastating whole villages, or through bad luck, like eating rotten grain and spending the last hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls. And the funerals, you were lucky if you had one. The bodies used to bury quickly to avoid diseases. No embalming, no coffins, polished, just one hole, some few prayers murmured, and a shallow mound of earth if remained enough space in his cemetery. So that, yes, in medieval times, life was brutal, short, and constantly besieged through death in all its casual forms. Don't you? You were retiring. Simply. You stopped showing up. And speaking of outings, let's move on to your final chapter. The medieval dream dies. So, what's such your day? Have you woken up in filth? You have done your needs in a bucket. You've brushed the teeth with illusions, almost tea. You faint from hunger. You've worked until your spine cried out. For mercy's sake, you've scratched your wool that tea. It itched. You prayed not to catch the plague, and you dodged it by the hairs. A execution public by have a squirrel. Welcome to a single day in medieval Europe. Do you still dream of becoming, in a gentleman's case? Think again. That version, romantic medieval setting. Swordsmen brave, noble ladies in towers, battles, heroic deeds, and feasts in big halls, illuminated by candles. It's a myth, polished by fairy tales and fantasy books. Actually, the medieval world was harsh, cruel, and profoundly unfair. Hierarchy was everything. If you were born poor thing, you kept being poor. If you were born delicious, congratulations, you had further chances of survival. But still, you were just one bad bowl of soup away from dissension and a burial. Rushed. Not even the nobles were immune to poverty. The castles were stone refrigerators with air currents full of fleas, smoke, and marriages with motivations, policies. Of course, you had a layer of skin and a glass of wine, but also a 50% chance of dying in a skirmish or by a sliver infected. It wasn't exactly luxury. The simpler times were not simple. They were relentless. Everything led further. Time. Everything hurt. More. Everything. From here I started chewing. I had consequences. Life was about survival, not leisure. And if you found a moment, quiet time to think, dream, imagine something better, there was a lot that could. What to do with it? No mobility ascending, without modern medicine, without the internet to search. What is this? Rash strange. You lived, you suffered, you worked, and you died, within a radius of 10 miles from where you were born. But here there is the part further wild, through it all. This, people still. She laughed, sang songs, told stories. She fell in love and found meaning, not because life was easy, but because the humans are that stubborn. Even in the chapters further dark, they made space for light, so that this night, when tea slides to your bed, cleans up interior plumbing, antibiotics, and central heating, such time. Say thank you in silence to the world modern. Already your forefathers that they fought against the rats, the hunger, and the feudalism, so that you didn't have that do it. Catherine the Great, long before she was Catherine the Great, Empress of all Russia, master of reform, and icon of ambition. She was simply Sophia, born as Sophie Friederike Auguste von Anhalt, Zerbst in 1729. She was the daughter of a princely family, German, relatively unknown. Her little one duchy. In Pomerania, it offered little power. But Sophia did. Same. It had something that non-qualification could provide. A intelligence sharp, an implacable charm, and a hunger, silent and burning with greatness. Her education was strict. Her mother, Johanna, was cold and calculating. Not a figure warm and protective, but an upstart obsessed with the status. His father, an officer Prussian, it was more distant, that disciplinary. As a child, Sophia learned to walk because of the line between obedience and cunning. He read voraciously, he spoke several languages, and learned to notice a room before speaking in she. Skills that would soon become in survival tools in one of the most brutal in Europe. When the Russian Empress Elizabeth Petrovna began to search wife for the heir, Grand Duke Peter looked further beyond the borders of Russia. Peter himself was of Russian descent, German, and Empress Elizabeth believed that a docile and grateful foreign bride would be further easy to control. Sophia was a perfect fit. Noble blood, faith, Lutheran, which would be seen obliged to abandon, and a reputation for grace and humility. At only 14 years, Sophia was, he called to Russia. He arrived in the frigid capital, St. Petersburg, in 1740-4, dressed in fine fabrics, Germans, and one smiled diplomat. Her mother pushed her forward as a chess piece. Sophia, however, had his own game in mind. To be accepted in Russian society, he converted to Orthodoxy, adopting the name of Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. The ceremony was public, symbolic, and transformative. It wasn't just changing religions. I was burning the bridge after she, going deeper in an empire foreigner with no return back. Nobody who would observe to that peaceful teenager in a coat leather trim could have predicted what would come. Then came betrayal, revolution, enlightenment, and empire. But from the moment in once Sophia set foot in the Russian court, she ceased to be a pawn and began to plot as becoming queen. Catherine's marriage to Grand Duke Peter was intended to ensure his place in the Russian royal family. But since, at first, it felt further as a cage that as a crown. Peter, heir to the throne Russian, it wasn't the I bet prince of fairy tales. Clumsy, immature, and obsessed with toy soldiers, there was a lot further interested in war games in his chambers than to rule an empire or to show affection for his new wife. Some stories even suggest who refused to consummate his marriage during years. He idolized Frederick the Great of Prussia and resented the Russian court that had given him power. Adopted. In contrast, Catherine embraced Russia with an iron determination. He learned his language, studied his history, and memorized the rituals orthodox. I wanted to belong. Pedro wanted to escape. This mismatch wasn't just emotional, it was political. The Russian court was a viper's nest of gossip, paranoia, and brutality. Power games. Empress Elizabeth still. He ruled with absolute authority, but his health was deteriorating. Everyone knew it. That was coming a transition, and all they had their own plans. Catalina was being watched constantly. They read her letters, monitored her friendships, and scrutinized her every move, every single one of his movements. He couldn't rely on his husband, nor in her mother, who continued whispering in her ear in name of interests foreigners, nor not even in his servants. In this world, alliances could become in accusations overnight. But Catalina wasn't naive. She learned to play the game, discreetly cultivating court games allies in the shadows. He captivated the officers' military personnel. She became friends with the scholars and won a reputation for dignity and moderation, a marked contrast with tantrums, children of their husband, and his open contempt because of Russian traditions. Though, once closed off, Catherine began to read Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Montesquieu. While others saw her as a young consort, she was building a vision, not only for itself same, but for Russia, a nation of strength, education, and reason. But there was a problem. How much further Pedro lived, but time Catherine remained in limbo. Wife. The powerlessness of a man incapable of governing. Thus that he waited. He observed. And he planned. He knew that the throne Russian wouldn't be inherited, I would have that be taken. In 1760-2, after almost 2 decades of waiting, observation, and maneuvers discreetly, Catalina saw his. He seized the moment and took advantage of it with astonishing skill, precision. Empress Isabella had dead, and Peter, now Peter III, was finally Tsar. But his reign, it began to crumble almost immediately. In just a few months, Peter alienated the church, offended the nobility, insulted the army, and wasted money. Praise for Prussia, Russia's enemy since toward a lot time. It reversed key policies, humiliated the clergy, and spoke openly about divorcing Catherine to marry his lover. The court, already wary of her behavior, erratic, it cooled down. The army, full of generals loyal to Catherine, he grumbled in the hallways. Even the Russians, commoners, devotees, and patriots saw Peter as a puppet foreigner who mocked their traditions. Catherine, observing all therefore, he took the initiative. In July of that same year, while Pedro was in, Catherine launched her summer palace, a bloodless charge. Supported by officers, key military personnel, including their lover, Grigory Orlov, and his influential brothers, rode through street. Petersburg in all its finery, it was proclaimed Empress Catherine II and won the loyalty of the powerful imperial guard. Peter, surprised and without allies, surrendered. It was a matter of days. He was arrested and shortly after found dead in circumstances mysterious. Officially, it was reported as colic hemorrhoidal. Unofficially, it was murder. Catherine was now empress. Not because birth, neither by marriage, but by willpower, ingenuity, and audacity. It was unprecedented. A woman born in he foreigner without legitimate right to claim he throne Russian there was taken he throne without a single battle. But his true challenge barely. It was beginning. It had that transform that bold quest for power into a lasting legacy. Would Russia accept it? Would the nobility respect it? Could it keep united he empire without suffering the same fate as his husband? Catherine understood that he can obtain through intrigue could get lost with the same ease. I needed govern not as a conspiratorial, but as a visionary. And so began his transformation of a conspirator, careful to an empress reformist. One that it would redraw the borders, embrace the Enlightenment, and redefine what meant being a woman in he power. Once that Catherine came to the crown, could to have refugee in his power. But he didn't. He had something bigger in mind that simply feel on a throne. He wanted transform Russia, and not just militarily or politically, but intellectually. While Pedro had adored Frederick the Great and the elite soldiers, Catherine idolized Voltaire. Diderot, already the bold Enlightenment thinkers. I believed in reason, the progress, education, and role of the monarch as servant of the people. Even, she same. He ruled with authority, absolute. Catherine didn't just read Enlightenment philosophy, he lived it. He maintained correspondence, direct conversation with Voltaire for more than 15 years, flattering him while defended his autocracy. He invited Diderot to his court and even bought all his library to support it economically. Door closed. She studied carefully texts legal, debated reforms and formulated policies to modernize he empire. His reign initial was plagued with efforts by encode Russian law. He formed the Commission Legislative in 1767, an ambitious project intended to rewrite all he Russia's legal code. Catherine's own nakaz, or instruction, was a manifesto political disguised, that he spoke of equality before the law, the dangers of torture, and the responsibility of the rulers to serve the common good. For an empress in 19th century Russia, 18, he was radical, but the ideals of the Enlightenment they owed to survive the realities of Russia, a vast feudal land and deeply conservative, governed by nobles that they preferred their servants exactly where they were because beneath them. Catherine knew it. Although she advocated, because of the reform, he acted cautiously. He abolished some forms of torture. He elaborated his access to secular education and built schools and libraries. But he also reaffirmed the control of the nobility over their territories to maintain them loyal. This was the balance which Catherine maintained, a philosopher queen in public, a empress practice. In private, he was torn between ideology and survival, between the brilliant Parisian salons and the raw Moscow's policy, its vision. For Russia, it was bold, but always calculated. In many senses, Catalina did not intend to turn Russia into European. I was trying to modernize it to its way, and that implied reforms, yes, but with an iron fist in silk glove. Catherine was not content with reforming Russia from inside. I wanted to expand it toward the exterior, to convert it in an empire worthy of fear, admiration, and envy. Where Peter the Great had opened a window toward the west, Catherine intended to tear down the walls. Under his leadership, Russia's borders expanded further than never. Book wars, not only to defend their crown, but to reshape the map of Europe. One of his campaigns further significant. It was against the Ottoman Empire. These wars, fought in waves during the decades of the 1760s, they were not only focused in territory, they were focused in influence. Catherine considered herself the liberator of the Christians Orthodox, that they lived under the domain Muslim and the legitimate protector of Eastern Europe. Under the command of generals like Alexander Suvorov and Grigory Potemkin, Russia captured key regions, such as Crimea, the northern coast of the Black Sea, and the access to ports of water warm, something that the Tsar's Russians there were coveted during generations. These victories were not only military, but symbolic. With each, through conquest, Catherine was sending a message. Russia was no longer Europe's distant and backward cousin. It was a continental power. He also led his look westward. In a series of agreements and maneuvers diplomats, Catherine participated in the partitions of Poland, dividing up the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which was in difficulties, along with Austria and Prussia. At the end of the third partition, in 1795, Poland was wiped off the map, and Russia claimed vast new lands and millions of new subjects. But Catherine didn't only conquer with armies. She also colonized with ideas. They built new cities. Routes expanded. Commercials. The following were invited. Settlers Germans to cultivate Russian lands. The empire became in a mosaic from the icy Baltic to the sunny Black Sea coast. And despite everything, Catherine continued being the central force, reading reports, giving orders, and supervising personally the way of his empire in expansion. Critics would accuse her of ambition for power, even imperialism. But for Catherine, expansion was not ambition. It was destiny. She believed that a great ruler was measured not only by ideas, but also by borders. I didn't just want to govern Russia. He wanted to transform it in an empire, civilized, feared, respected by his enemies, by his peers, and loyal only to she. Despite everything, his brilliance and power, Catherine the Great was equally famous. Hence, it happened behind the palace gates. And no, not everything was whispered in libraries. Life Catherine's private became in one of the aspects further commented on by their reign. He had lovers, not just one or two, but a selection meticulous of them, many decades further, young, often good-looking, and in occasions politically influential. Not them, he hid it. In fact, he used to reward them with titles, properties, and pensions, if they behaved well. If not, they said goodbye discreetly, sometimes with a friendly gratitude and a promotion. Among the lovers further, among the important figures, was Grigory Potemkin, a man as brilliant as bold. Their relationship, it blurred the lines between romance, politics, and society. Some historians, they believe that even they were able to have married in secret, Together, they shaped campaigns, military affairs, colonization projects, and the transformation of southern Russia. Potemkin was not just a lover. He was her co-governor in many senses. Even so, Europe could not ignore his scandal. Gossip swirled. Pamphlets, satirists painted her as lustful, insatiable, even unhinged. And after his death, the rumors only got worse. The most infamous was the story, completely false and grotesque, on a horse, widely known by their enemies to tarnish his legacy. But why? What was the obsession? Simple. Catalina was a woman that practiced he power without complexes. And in a world where it was expected that the rulers were virgins, saints, or figures, tragic, she refused to play that role. She lived, loved, and ruled under her own rules, terms, and that made her dangerous. Ironically, while her critics portrayed her as immoral, Catherine herself was deeply philosophical about love and sexuality. I believed that pleasure was a natural part of life, and relationships personal staff did not have by that threatened responsibility public. He separated emotion from government, a feat that few rulers mail. They achieved it. In reality, their relationships, they were often strategic. He surrounded himself with loyal, capable, and politically astute men, useful. And when they ceased to be, they let go, usually with a smile and a generous retirement. Catherine's love life did not weaken his government. It was part of his strategy, a blend of passion and power that made her unforgettable, envied and feared. Yet his charisma and control, the Catherine's reign was not free from danger. And in 1773, that danger arrived in the form of a Cossack bearded called Yemelyan Pugachev. I was not a rebel anyone. Pugachev, he claimed to be nothing less than Peter III, the deceased Catalina's husband. According to Hay, had survived the blow, and now he returned to claim he throne to the usurper German. It was absurd. Peter had gone toward time. But for the oppressed and exhausted classes, Russian casualties, the statement had no by what to be true. I just needed offer hope. Pugachev promised liberation, the end of marginalization, taxes further lowlands and lands for the common people. His words ignited a fire. In the Volga region, especially among the peasants, the Cossacks, and the old believers, in a time in that the gap between nobles and the marginalized had widened brutally, his promises, they sounded like salvation. Pugachev's rebellion became in the largest peasant uprising in Russian history. Cities were taken, strongholds. They fell. They were noble, massacred. For a moment, terrifying, it seemed that the empire seemed good to fracture. Catalina was shocked. This was not a war foreigner that could to win with cavalry and treaties. It was a revolt of their own people, rising up against the system. She ruled, but Catherine did not let herself be ruled. Carried by he panic. He acted. He sent forces, military professionals, to crush the rebellion without mercy. Pugachev's forces were defeated in 1700. 70-4. He was captured, exhibited in an iron cage, and finally decapitated in Moscow, a warning public for all that they dared to follow him. After that, Catherine redoubled her efforts by order and control. Their dreams of liberating the servants vanished silently. The rebellion had shown the limits of illustration in a country still chained to feudalism. Now, it was supported further in the nobility, which offered loyalty in exchange for absolute control about her servants. This was a turning point. The empress at a time, he quoted Voltaire, now stability was prioritized on philosophy. The reforms became cautious. Surveillance, it increased. There were even rumors that the rebellion I would be crushed before had Pugachev's breath could have lost my mind, but led behind it a warning that it tormented Catherine, that power cemented. Regarding inequality, I could only endure for a while before the storm broke. By the time Catherine the Great was approaching the last years of his life, there was ruled Russia during more than 3 decades, more than any ruler female in Russian history. From he moment in that took he power, there was defied expectations, remodeled his empire, and redefined what a woman and a monarch they could be. During Catherine's reign, Russia became a true power European. Its territory expanded in over 200,000 miles squares, encompassing Crimea, parts of Poland, and stretches of the Black Sea coast. These were not just victories military personnel. They were axis strategic, ensuring water ports warm and transforming heat trade. But it's the legacy not only remained drawn in maps, Catherine also left a cultural footprint. He helped to found the Hermitage Museum, brought together one of the largest European art collections, and maintained correspondence with further brilliant minds of the Enlightenment. His court became a center of sophistication, art, and ambition intellectual. In a country often considered late by the Europeans' Westerners, Catherine firmly placed Russia in his cultural map. He modernized education, he established schools for girls and promoted book printing. She introduced smallpox vaccination. In Russia, even receiving the vaccine publicly was an act of bravery. Scientific in his era, however, his reign also riddled with contradictions. Although I admired the Enlightenment ideals, never freed the serfs. In fact, he extended servitude still further toward the interior of Russia. Its reforms, although impressive, they were mostly from the top toward below, designed for polishing his empire without transformation really its foundations. Even so, the Catherine's government brought stability and ambition. He understood that his power was not inherited. It was forged, managed, and defended constantly. She did not rule by divine right, but by willpower, brilliance, politics, and ruthless calculation. She was called many things: ways, usurper, tyrant, reformer, seductress, but above all, everything was effective. When he died in 1700, in 1906, Russia was more richer, bigger, and more formidable than there was been in centuries. He left behind a throne, sure, an empire expanded, and a legend that would last for centuries. Catherine didn't just reign. She ruled with intellect, strategy, and absolute control of history. And in doing so, she became further that an empress. She became a myth, yet his power, expansion, and lasting legacy. Catherine the Great continued being, in essence, a woman that was sailing in a man's world and reshaped it in his own image. Behind the portraits imperial and the decrees state there was someone deeply aware of the precarious that was his position. She wasn't born Russian. She ascended to the throne through a coup d'etat. He ruled an empire that he didn't want a woman in charge. And yet, not only did it endure, but that she prospered. Catherine never settled for being merely ornamental. She read constantly. He wrote non-stop and never. He stopped learning. His routine daily life was intense. Hours of reading reports, communicating with powers foreigners, editing status documents, and managing a court full of factions rivals. He wasn't content with simply feel in his throne. He operated it as a born stateswoman. She also felt lonely in many senses. He surrounded himself with courtiers, lovers, and artists, but wrote in his memoirs about the little people in which could to truly trust. His son, Pablo, of whom distrusted and maintained away from the affairs of state, became in a man who I was afraid that ruin all his progress. Its strongest link, emotional connection with Grigory Potemkin, faded in a deep friendship. But his death in 1790-1 left a wound that never she healed completely. Catalina forged. His image was carefully considered. He understood the power of narrative and wielded it better than most of the monarchs of their era. It was presented as the mother of Russia, the monarch, the enlightened one, the warrior, the empress, and the lover of the arts. But beneath those roles was a woman that there was supported her rejection, betrayal, the scandal and rebellion, and it continued. Go ahead. When he died in 1790-6, left behind an empire transformed, but also questions. Could have made more to end servitude. Were they seen committed to their ideals enlightened because of politics? Was it more reformer or ruler? History remembers by he qualification that the Great One was never awarded. It wasn't because she was perfect, kind, or fair. It was because took he power, and he exercised it in their own terms, in a time and place where it was supposed to, that women should not have. None. She didn't just wear the crown. She rewrote what meant deserve it. The Red Queen of Palenque. In the wetlands depths of the Chiapas jungle, in southern Mexico, the ruins of Palenque whisper stories from ancient times, Mayan world. Imposing temples rise about he canopy, its limestone faces, eroded by heat time, but still brimming with secrets. And in 1990-4, one of those secrets were revealed. A team of archaeologists, Mexicans, led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez, was inspecting Temple 3, a pyramid relatively modest, next to the most famous temple of the inscriptions, the burial place of the powerful King Pakal the Great. It was not expected that the temple of the throne housed much until they noticed something strange. A camera hidden and sealed beneath the structure. None Luther had. He was wearing a hat. He was impeccable. When the archaeologists opened it and descended inside, finding a stone sarcophagus that was resting in silence, the air was loaded with the weight of centuries. Upon opening the lid, a red powder rose up like smoke, bright, a striking red. The interior was covered in cinnabar and powder, a mercury sulfide toxic used ceremonially by the Mayans. And within that cloud crimson lay the skeleton of a woman that was been buried with care and reverence. Her bones were fragile but intact, their skull still Lucia, a jade mask, and its body was surrounded by funerary offerings, necklaces, diadems, and ear ornaments, all made with jade and shell. All in he burial denoted royalty. However, none name was registered. None, the glyph identified her. It was one of the burials feminine further rich, never found in Mesoamerica. And yet, it was a complete enigma. Why did they bury her in red powder? Who was it? Was it a queen, a priestess, or perhaps even Pakal's wife? The researchers called her the Red Queen, and the name, it endured. But even with science, modern forensics, they couldn't determine with certainty who was it. Only that there was vivid around the century 7, during the golden age of Palenque. Unlike most tombs Mayans, theirs had remained hidden, undisturbed, and deliberately isolated. Her burial was not merely ceremonial, it was spiritual. This woman was not to be remembered with words. She was to be remembered through ritual, color, and mystery that led back the feature further. The unsettling thing about the Red Queen's tomb was not her jade jewels, nor her camera silence sealed. It was the red powder. A thick cinnabar layer in dust covered it everything. The sarcophagus, the walls, her bones, even the offerings that surrounded her. She clung to it, as blood to the stone. For the Maya, this was no coincidence. Cinnabar, made of mercury sulfide, crushed. It was one of the substances further sacred and dangerous places in the world ancient. Its vibrant red color not only made an impact visually, it symbolized blood, the rebirth, and the life force that connected the kingdoms, human and divine. Red was sacred. It was the color of dawn, of sacrifice, of life that emerges from death. And it wasn't just symbolic, it was spiritual. To cover the ritual of killing people with cinnabar was intended to transform them, body, preserving it not for eternity, but for the transition. In Mayan belief, death was not the end. It was a passage, a crossing toward other layer cosmic. And so, the Red Queen, whatever it was being prepared not only for the burial, but for deification. But there's another one layer in this. Cinnabar is toxic. Exposure repeated can provoke poisoning by mercury, tremors, hallucinations, and even death. The Maya. They probably didn't understand chemistry, but they perceived his power. It was volatile, powerful, dangerous. To bathe a corpse in, he was to declare that this person was no ordinary mortal. In Palenque, very few were buried with Cinnabar. Pakal the Great, the powerful king whose pyramid domina, the site was one of them. His body, like hers, was too saturated with red dust. That one detail aroused speculations. Was the Red Queen her wife, his mother, or someone of equal standing status divine? His skull there was been placed about a jaguar skin cape, another symbol sacred. To his around, bone needles, obsidian blades, and jade figurines in miniature, they hinted rituals done during his life, or in his honor upon dying. Every part of him burial told a story without words, a story of power, wrapped in secret. A woman prepared to cross into the underworld, not in silence, but in a ceremony, soaked in the color of sacrifice. Around the remains, in the crimson of the Red Queen, a world of silence reigned, broken only by the gleam of jade, shell, and obsidian. They were not mere ornaments. They were offerings, each a carefully chosen to accompany her in his trip to the most their Maya, the Xibalba. On either side, heavy and cold, they appeared jade necklaces whose polished surfaces still they shone after 300 years underground. Jade wasn't just beautiful, it was sacred. The Maya considered it a symbol of life, eternal. It represented the green of the corn, the vitality of the jungle, and the breath of the gods. Only the elite were buried with jade. For the Red Queen, it covered his chest, wrists, and ears, one clear sign that in life exercised influence, perhaps even divine favor. One of the objects further evocative was the jade mask placed delicately about his face. Unlike masks mortuary, the golden ones of Egypt, this one was subtle, constructed with dozens of tiny mosaics, ready to imitate the contours of his skull. The mask fulfilled a ritual function to protect the soul, preserving identity and presenting it as divine in the eyes of the gods. Scattered near his bones, there was bone needles, obsidian blades, and shell artifacts. These could have been ritual tools or symbols of their status as priestess, healer, or royal matriarch. A bone pin was engraving, faint but with a purpose. A small echo of his voice lost in time. At his feet, and along the edges of the tomb, there were ceramic vessels, still sealed, probably at time filled with offerings, food, drink, or incense, to sustain his spirit further beyond death. The Maya, they believed that he further. There, it was a journey, dangerous, stratified, full of challenges. The articles were not luxuries. They were necessities. To modernize, the tomb feels intimate, not overloaded, but intentional. There was no gold, nor cars, nor pomp, only articles chosen for their spiritual significance. It was a map for the soul. Through these treasures, we glimpse as the Maya understood death not as an end, but as a transition of power. The Red Queen was not buried to be forgotten. She was being prepared to move up. Despite the greatness of his tomb, the Red Queen left behind it a void, disturbing. None name, neither registration adorned his sarcophagus. None glyph I could identify her on the walls. It was clearly someone powerful. But who? Since he moment in that opened his tomb, the scholars they began to attempt thy ends. The theory further, the convincing theory, is that the Red Queen was Tsakbu Aja, wife of Kinish Janab Pakal, known today as Pakal the Great, the ruler further famous from Palenque. Tsakbu Aja was more that she was merely Pakal's consort. She was born into the nobility and married a member of the royal dynasty of Palenque at an early age. He was at least 3 children, all of high status, and played a key ceremonial role during the reign of his husband. If someone she could be buried with such honor, it was her. Supporting this theory, the location of the tomb was just a few meters from Pakal's great burial site, the Temple of the Inscriptions. The proximity suggests a pairing deliberate, husband and wife, rulers even in death. And then there is Hisinaba. Only 2 burials were found in Palenque, with such intense coverage of Sinabar, Pakal, and the Red Queen. It is unlikely that this was a coincidence, but this is where the mystery deepens. The following appears to be unrelated and possibly a separate, incomplete sentence. DNA tests were conducted on both sets of remains in the hope of confirming the connection, but the results were not conclusive. The woman's bones showed no maternal direct contact with Pakal, but that didn't rule it out. A relationship marital. After all, the marriage does not require blood shared. Some, they have argued, that could have been Sakkuk, the powerful mother of Pakal, who he ruled Palenque before he reached the age of majority. Others suggest that could have been a addition priestess or a sister or a royal ancestor whose name it has simply been lost in the erosion of history. Even so, the evidence points more strongly to Tsakbu Aja, queen by title, mother of kings, and counterpart Pakal's spirituality. The absence of a name, it might not be an oversight, perhaps was unintentional. In Mayan cosmology, the soul lived not through monuments, but through rituals, symbols, and the whispers from the earth. And so, the Red Queen remains suspended between legend and truth, a woman that she ruled, remembered not in stone, but in scarlet and silence. To understand the Red Queen, we must grasp the world of which it came from, a world where the women Mayans, especially those of royalty, had further influence, of which many they believe. In Mayan civilization, politics was often a family matter. Royal women were not mere consorts, they were passive. They were diplomatic, priestesses, and powerful. They celebrated rituals, sponsored temples, and performed papers crucial in the maintenance of legitimacy dynastic. Their lineages, they were political capital used for forging alliances and secure their rights to the throne. Let's take as, for example, Sakkuk, the mother of Pakal the Great. When the throne of Palenque remained vacant, she same took his power and ruled as queen regent until his son, she reached the age of majority. She wasn't a figure substitute. He was a ruler by right, issuing decrees and supervising construction projects. Without it, Pakal might not have existed. Promoted never, and she wasn't one. Anomaly in everything Himayan world, in places as Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul. The inscriptions, they show women performing ceremonies important, participating in diplomacy, warlike, and at times, ruling directly. They were often depicted in stelae and murals, adorned with elaborate headdresses and badges, standing next to the kings as equal or sometimes by above them. His words were recorded in glyphs. Their names were remembered until they ceased to be. By the time they arrived, centuries later, much of that memory had been lost to the Spanish conquerors. Eroded. The colonial perspective viewed women native as figures silent in a world dominated by men. But archaeology account a history different, one of gender roles complex, where power was negotiated, not simply inherited. This context presents the Red Queen under a new light. It can, that he did not govern nominally, but the rich and sacred burial, located next to Pakal, suggests that he was a central pillar of the royal order. His jade mask was not just an ornament, it was a symbol of identity, of power, that was preserved in life and was protected in death. His lineage could have been Higlu, that kept linked to the Palenque dynasty. In Mayan civilization, a queen was not just a queen, she was guardian of the lineage, sacred, a voice in the ceremonies, and often the bridge between gods and men. The Red Queen may not have name, but in his world never was change. The Red Queen was not only she was buried with treasure, in a architecture rich in purpose, imbued with Mayan cosmology, ritual symbolism, and design, intentional. His tomb was not simply a tomb, it was the gateway to eternity. His body was uncovered inside Temple 3, one of the pyramids further small in the heart of Palenque. However, its proximity to the Temple of the Inscriptions, the resting place of Pakal the Great, is revealing. Temples were not built randomly. Their location was sacred, guided through astrology, the myth, and the legacy dynastic. Temple 3 rises modestly in compared to his majestic neighbor, but he's still hiding something further intimate, a crypt, sealed intact, perfectly preserved. It was built deep within the core of the temple, accessible only by a ladder, narrow and steep. The descent to its tomb feels almost symbolic, a ritual journey towards the underworld. The camera yes, it is austere, made of carved stone, sealed hermetically during more than 1,130 years. The glyph or mural covers the walls. None ornamental carving account his history, but perhaps that silence is intentional. This was not a space for the alive not to interpret it, but so that the dead will transform him. In the center, its sarcophagus sits like a carved altar in limestone. It echoes the great stone coffin of Pakal. Beside it, while the Pakal lid is famously engraved with Renaissance scenes cosmic, the tomb of the Red Queen is more sober. The focus is on the interior of the body, in his cinnabar, in the ritual of death same. And yet, there are subtle signs architectural that they insinuate. Meaning, the tomb disaligned with this to west, a symbolic path that reflects the sun's journey from life to death. The camera is small, but powerful. It feels deliberate, personal, an enclosure sacred to someone revered. The temple's Mayans were tools, cosmological, bridges between the sky, earth, and the underworld. To be buried in one, it was to rise further beyond the kingdom human. The home the Red Queen's eternal destiny was not a last-minute idea moment. It was a sanctuary carefully built, a place where death became in transformation. His bones rest in stone, his essence in cinnabar, and its legacy in the architecture. A temple that speaks without words, telling us that it mattered. For the ancient, for the Maya, death was not the end. It was a threshold, a passage sacred to the underworld acquaintance as Xibalba. And for someone like the Red Queen, the crossing was not only spiritual, it was political, cosmological, and profoundly ritualized. The ritual's funeral directors were events carefully choreographed, rooted in myth, destined to guide the soul through the treacherous layers of the underworld. Mayan texts and iconography tell us they say that Xibalba was not a life after death peaceful. It was a labyrinth of darkness, rivers of blood, trials, and gods of death. Only those duly buried, prepared ritually and spiritually equipped, could carry out The trip was a success. The Red Queen was buried, wrapped in cinnabar, enclosed, carved in stone, and surrounded by offerings. All of them evidence of an elite burial. But there's more. The presence of bone needles and obsidian blades in his grave suggests rituals of self-sacrifice, possibly tools symbolic that represented rites that there was done in life, or that were recreated in his burial to empower his spirit. The mask funeral home, carefully assembled with jade tiles, it was not simply decorative. Could have served like a container spiritual that preserved your face and identity in his trip to the most. There, in Mayan belief, the face was a mirror of the soul, and she needed to be recognized by the gods. The ceramic vessels that surrounded her, they were able to have contained sometimes chocolate, corn, water, or even pulque to nourish it in the other world. Other objects, such as ray spines or shelled trumpets, could have represented tools, spiritual elements, invocations to the gods, or symbols of ritual communication. The burial was not just a farewell, it was a transformation. The Maya, they believed in cycles. Death as seed, the burial as plantation, and the further there as renaissance. Kings and queens were often seen as incarnations, earthly beings of the gods. And in death, they returned to those origins divine. The Red Queen, covered in the color of blood, buried in a pyramid, and honored with offerings, it was being prepared for the Renaissance, not like mortal, but as a being bound to order sacred of the cosmos. His burial was not the end of his history. It was the beginning of his legend. Just a few steps from the Red Queen's final resting place lies one of the tombs further emblematic of Mesoamerica, that of Kenich-Janab Pakal, known simply like Pakal the Great. His burial within the great temple of the inscriptions is famous by his art, his magnitude, and its profound symbolism, spiritual. But what does? The fact that the Red Queen's tomb is so extraordinary is not only due to its interior, but also to where it was found. His sarcophagus was hidden in Temple 3, right next to the Pakal monument, in a city like Palenque, where each temple was carefully positioned to reflect beginning cosmic. Their closeness wasn't accidental, it was intentional. Statement recorded in stone. Many scholars, they believe that the Red Queen was Tsakbu Aja, the queen and trusted consort of Pakal, although her grave it lacks inscriptions, but the similarities between their burials are striking. Both were wrapped in cinnabar, both buried in pyramids, both buried with jade, and both treated with extreme reverence. These rituals are reflected mutually like two halves of one sacred narrative. Pakal's cover, famously, depicts him falling into the underworld tree, a scene cosmic tale of death and rebirth. The tomb of the Red Queen, plus simple, it contains no such iconography, but his symbolism resides in the very combination. If Pakal represented the sun, traveling by the underworld at night to resurface, then the Red Queen could have represented by the moon, the force female that go on his own mysterious path in heaven. Together, they embodied a duality, cosmic, masculine and feminine, king and queen, sun and moon, order and ritual. In Mayan mythology, the government was not singular, it was relational. Harmony in the cosmos required balance, and that balance extended to the dynastic court. By placing the Red Queen next to Pakal, the Mayans, they preserved not only a marriage, but the alliance cosmic. Its proximity in death could have reflected their roles in life. A queen, not behind, but beside her king, sharing not only a throne, but a legacy. In their tombs, they speak without words, two souls entwined, in cinnabar and stone united through eternity. Although his name lost in he, over time, the Red Queen of Palenque endures not as a relic forgotten, but as one of the women further enigmatic and powerful of the world ancient. His tomb, sealed during more than 1300 years, it whispers across the centuries, inviting questions that they resonate more strongly with each discovery. It represents a mystery that it still resists full understanding, perhaps never lets know exactly who it was. None glyph recorded his name, none thief told his history, and, of some kind way, the careful in his burial, the richness of its offerings, the symbolism of his bones bathed in crimson, all talks about a woman deeply important, not only as wife or consort, but as someone that boasted true influence, spiritual weight, and royal blood. Today, the Red Queen tells us, it forces us to reevaluate our assumptions. It's a reminder that in the Mayan world, women did not remain in silence. They directed rituals, they ruled cities, and forged dynasties. Although kings like Pakal have captured the attention during a lot time, the resurgence of the Red Queen, remember that her power didn't belong to men alone. It flowed through mothers, queens, priestesses, and visionaries. Their legacy is more than the treasures that he left. It's the conversation which has begun among archaeologists, historians, artists, and storytellers. Each jade bead, each layer of cinnabar, each decision architectural in a temple, she's telling us something deliberate. This woman, it mattered, and perhaps that's the part further extraordinary of his history. Not what we know, but what still we don't know. The Red Queen tells us, teaches that history is not just a collection of facts. It's a puzzle, living, a longing human, shared to connect with the past. In that sense, his legacy, it is still developing. Lies wrapped in red, the color of life and the sacrifice, of blood and the Renaissance. His face, once hidden after a jade mask, now us. Look through science, the art and wonder. She remains nameless, but not voiceless, mysterious, but not forgotten. The Red Queen could have ruled a kingdom in life, but in death governs something bigger, our imagination. His tomb was sealed in stone. Its history was written in silence. And somehow way even speaks. Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo was born July 6, 1907 in Vibrant, Coyoacán district, then a town on the outskirts of Mexico City. His childhood home, the Blue House, was full of color, contradiction, and a forced silence. Later, it would become in a sanctuary, a battlefield, and a museum for one of the artists further emblematic of the century. 20. Frida was the third of 4 daughters of Guillermo Kahlo, a photographer Hungarian-German, and Matilde Calderón, a Catholic devotee of ancestry, indigenous and Spanish. Her parents were opposites. William, reserved and intellectual. Matilde, religious and emotional, distant. Frida would inherit the introspection and the gaze, her father's artistic talent, but also her iron will, her mother's resilience. As a child, Frida was imaginative, outspoken, and bold. She read voraciously and did questions that most of the adults didn't want to answer. But at 6 years old contracted polio, which let his leg right further thin and weak than the other. A difference physics that tried disguise it with long skirts, but that never allowed that limit his spirit. The illness left her prostrate in bed for months and isolated from others' children. During this, over time, she became friends with her father, who encouraged her to do exercise, riding and bike, and stay mentally alert. Unlike most girls her age, at that time, Frida did not aspire to be a wife nor a housewife. With the goal of becoming a medical doctor, enrolled at the prestigious National Preparatory School of Mexico City at the age of 15, being one of the few girls accepted. There he stood out not only for his intelligence, but also because his wit rebel, his radical thinking, and a unique sense of style. He joined a group of young people, intellectuals, acquaintances, as the cachuchas, who they were debating about philosophy, literature, and politics. Frida felt attracted for the revolution, for the ideas that they defied tradition. But even in those first years before the bus accident that would define his body and before fame that would define his, Frida Kahlo's legacy already painted the world with sharp edges, uninhibited ideas, and an identity too big to fit in nobody's expectations more. Not only was it growing in Coyoacán, it was preparing to rebuild by complete. September 17, 1925. Frida Kahlo's life was divided in two, the girl that there was been and the woman in which it was seen forced to convert. That afternoon, she boarded a wooden bus with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, after school. They were laughing, joking, and probably arguing. Frida never. He did nothing halfway. But at times then, the bus, it crashed into a tram, and in an instant, the future fell apart, in pain, metal, and silence. The crash, it was horrible. The tram, it smashed the bus against a wall, splintering the wood and throwing the passengers. Frida was impaled by an iron railing. He entered by his hip left and came out through the pelvis. Her spine was fractured in 3 parts. His leg right was made shattered. His foot was dislocated. His collarbone and ribs were broken. His shoulder was dislocated. His abdomen was pierced. He was only 18 years. A man covered her with a coat borrowed. Someone further noticed that his body had shone, not from blood, but by gold dust that I was wearing in a bag. There was exploited with the impact, sprinkling his broken body with what it seemed shining ash. Frida was taken to the Red Cross hospital and underwent numerous surgeries during the following months passed. Weeks in a full body cast, lying on his back, immobile, writhing because of the infection and the uncertainty. The future that there was imagined to become the doctor was walking away more with each day that it happened. But in that stillness, then something began to move. His father gave him paintbrushes. His mother set up a special easel to hang them on. About his bed, a mirror. He was placed in his canopy, so that could be seen. And there, lying in a plaster cast and dying, Frida began to paint. First by boredom, then because obsession. His first topics were his own reflection, because she was everything I had. But what emerged, it was not vanity, it was survival. The accident had destroyed physically, but he had also opened a door to your own mind, to his own body, and finally, language surrealism of pain and identity that would define his art. The girl that wanted to heal to others. Now he began to heal himself, same, brushstroke by brushstroke, while Frida Kahlo lay encapsulated, made of plaster and steel, a body struggling with him. Same with each breathing, he began to paint. What began as a form of therapy soon became in a language. And that language was deeply personal, brutally honest, and often difficult to look at. That was precisely the point. Frida didn't paint pretty flowers, neither landscapes polite. He painted the pain, his pain, physical, emotional, and existential. His first topics were self-portraits, not because vanity, but because, as she said, I paint myself because I'm often alone and because I am the subject that better I know. Her first works, they were little format, painted about tin plate panels, either wood, inspired in Mexican altarpieces, devotional paintings intended to count stories of suffering and miracles. Frida introduced this tradition in inside. Her body became in he canvas, her emotions in the altar. He painted himself, same divided, pierced, bleeding. In a painting, it is impaled by nails as a modern martyr. In another, it floats in a landscape arid, tied to a broken column, a metaphor for her shattered spine. She painted herself crying, fractured, decapitated and naked, but never passive, always observing. His pain was not purified. He painted the ugliness of trauma with beauty, defiance, and even humor. Each piece was a claim of his body, its experience, and his identity as women in a world who often tried to define her. But Frida didn't just have his history. He was inventing a new kind of visual narrative, one that fused Mexican folk art, the surrealism, illustration medical, and the symbolism. His paintings became an autopsies, dreamlike images of her soul, framed in color, culture, and myths. By the time he had recovered enough, as if to walk again, although with pain, Frida was no longer the girl that there was. She dreamed of being a doctor. She was an artist, and his art was unlike anything else nobody had seen. Taken the worst that he had passed and had converted in a source of creation. Frida Kahlo did not only paint his pain, he made that the world saw it, and in doing so, it turned suffering in an sacred space for self-expression. In 1928, still recovering painting, and with only 21 years, Frida Kahlo met the man who would become in the relationship deeper and more turbulent of his life, Diego Rivera. He was 20 years older than she, and it was already the painter, further famous in Mexico, of imposing in stature and presence. Rivera was a giant of muralism, Mexican, known for its impressive frescoes, with a strong political charge that they narrated the history of the Mexican people. Frida already had seen his I admired her work, but now wanted to know his opinion about hers. She took her paintings to the Ministry of Education, interrupting his job in scaffolding to ask her point blank, "Do I have talent?" Diego looked at her and said, "Yes, and not only because kindness." He acknowledged she was somewhat unusual, a voice unfiltered, raw, and unpretentious, full of rage, irony, pain, and beauty. They began as such an absorbing relationship as creative. Frida said at a time, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life. In one, I was hit by a tram. The other was Diego. They got married in 1929, an odd couple to outsiders. Diego, burly, unfaithful, politically famous. Frida, sharp-tongued, fiercely independent. Already, he walked with a cane. His parents called him a marriage between an elephant and a dove. Their bond was passionate, but chaotic. Diego supported his art and encouraged his growth as painter, but she was also unfaithful without ceasing. Even with her own, Frida's sister, Cristina, Frida remained devastated and, in return, had lovers, both men and women, including rumors of romances with Leon Trotsky and the painter Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, and they remarried a year later, then with others' conditions. This time, Frida would keep his autonomy, its home, their money, and their last name. His second marriage was based less in traditional love and more in the collaboration, creative and understanding mutual. Despite the betrayals and the heartbreak, Diego continued being a force constant in Frida's life. It challenged her. It hurt her, but she also believed in she as artist, as revolutionary, and as a woman capable of redefining the painting concept. Together, they were not peaceful, but were legendary. In the 1900s, in the 30s, Frida Kahlo accompanied Diego Rivera on a trip north to San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. While he performed important murals by commission, these years in he foreigner put it face to face with the industrialism American, the wealth and contradictions of capitalism, and left her with a deep discomfort, politics. Frida was a proud Mexican nationalist, a communist committed to and an admirer of traditions indigenous people. Opulence that witnessed in the United States, especially during the Great Depression, ravaged much of the country. It only deepened his disillusionment. In Letters Home, he mocked cultural materialism and obsession because of appearances. He missed the rawness, the color, and the contradictions of Mexico. While Diego was painting enormous murals on the walls of factories, Frida began to paint revolutions further small and silent works, deeply personal about tin and canvas. His style solidified, sharp, surreal, emotive, and intimate. It was during this time that produced some of his self-portraits further iconic. Frida didn't just paint herself because vanity. She painted herself to survive. Her identity became in his landscape. With the body constantly sore by his multiple accident surgeries and a pregnancy failed in Detroit, he took refuge in her inner self. Her portraits showed it, bleeding, fragmented, exposed, yet her face was always serene, always direct, unpretentious. One of his works, further shocking, Henry Ford Hospital. The exhibit lying down in a hospital bed, crying, surrounded by symbols floating loss. A fetus, a snail, equipment, a doctor said, a fractured pelvis. It was raw, graphic, and profound, emotional. A canvas that oozed true. Back in Mexico, Frida immersed herself in left-wing politics. She and Diego welcomed Leon Trotsky in his home while he lived in exile. Frida looked Tehuana dresses, garments, indigenous people traditional, not only as fashion, but as a statement, political and cultural. His art. He never abandoned his beliefs. His identity, his body and its ideologies became intertwined in his work. While Rivera was painting, Frida painted murals of the revolution his cost human. The body in pieces, the mind in flames, and the eye always returning his gaze. In the exile and illness, became not only a painter of pain, but a painter of the resistance. When Frida Kahlo returned to Mexico in the late 1900s, by 30, she was no longer just Diego Rivera's wife. She had converted in something completely different, a force, an artist whose job radiated honesty raw, symbolism, surrealism, and cultural identity. Upon returning to his homeland, he found fully with him same. Her blue house in Coyoacan became, in a sanctuary of color and contradiction, walls of brilliant cobalt, moldings, yellow statues, Aztecs in he garden, monkeys and parrots wandering freely. The house was an extension, a living embodiment of Frida's imagination. She was a blend of tradition and rebellion, elegance and earthiness. Here he surrounded himself with artifacts, pre-Columbian, exotic, folk art and books revolutionaries. He used daring Tehuana dresses, adorned with flowers in he hair and paint, amidst the aroma of copal incense and the mariachi sounds in the street. This period framed an explosion of creativity. His paintings became further intricate, more symbolic, and more politics. Works like The Two Fridas revealed the self divided, one with a suit European with a heart bleeding, the other one with clothes, indigenous, strong, and serene. It was Frida's visual autobiography, a portrait of love, loss, and heritage. In 1939, he explained his construction site in Paris, where artists as Picasso, Breton, and Kandinsky praised his style fiercely original. But even among the surrealists, Frida stood out. When André Breton tried to label it as one of the hers, she objected. They thought that was surrealist, he said, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality. He painted Mexico, not the romanticized version, postcard version, but he a living, breathing country that I adored her. Her work, it throbbed with symbolism. Skeletons, hummingbirds, hearts, thorns, corn, and blood. It honored the roots, indigenous people of their homeland, at the same time that unmasked the violence of his past and its present. But even as that, his voice, her artistic talent was growing stronger. Health continued deteriorating. Multiple surgeries, infections, and chronic pain became in reality's everyday things. Even so, she painted despite that, reclining in bed, with his torso hunched over and fingers tight around the paintbrush. Frida had returned to Mexico, not to rest, but to demand his power through painting, politics, and his intrepid self. Acceptance same. Tailored that the decade of the 1900s was progressing 40, the Frida Kahlo's body continued betraying her. Her spine was deteriorating. Her leg right suffered infections constants. He underwent more than 30 surgeries throughout his life, often in a succession, exhausting. Sometimes, it remained in bed for months, in a cast, or immobilized by traction devices that separated him the bones. But still, that's how he painted. Each canvas during these years became so a release, as in an act of resistance. His works became further darker, more challenging. He painted with a clarity sharpened by the pain, refusing to hide. Following the metaphor, in The Broken Column, it is presented departure in half, with the body crossed by nails, an ion column cracked, replacing her spine. Yet her face is stoic, her gaze impassive. For Frida, pain was no longer just a theme. It was her partner, his antagonist, his muse. Her voice, politics, was also done further strong. He joined the Mexican Communist Party, marched in demonstrations, wrote inflammatory letters, and denounced imperialism and injustice. When their health, he no longer allowed it walking, he introduced himself in the protests in wheelchair, with signs defiant and shouting slogans. In 1953, Frida had his first solo exhibition in Mexico, a celebration of their art that I should to have celebrated toward time. But her health was so fragile that the doctors told him that he couldn't attend, so that she did what only Frida would do. She arrived in ambulance. They took her in stretcher and they placed her in the center of the gallery. in his hospital bed, dressed in traditional finery, surrounded by her own work, received the guests with tequila, laughter, and that fire that still it was burning in his gaze. His last paintings were both childish and heartbreaking. In Marxism will give health to the sick people, he painted himself, herself, with a steel corset cradled by the hands of Marx, discarding the symbols of oppression. Their last construction site known, it was a still life of watermelons, slices, one piece with the inscription, "Long live life." Even in the face of death, he remained challenging, cheerful, and political. The latest Frida Kahlo's portraits were not simply self-portraits. They were acts revolutionaries, painted with pain, but always marked for life. July 13, 1950-4 to the 40. 7 years, Frida Kahlo died in his same place, where the Blue House was born in Coyoacán. The official cause was a embolism pulmonary, but his relatives, they were murmuring something deeper. They were state sick, yes, but also exhausted by the pain, the surgeries, the long war with his own body, barely. A few days earlier, there had been attended a protest policy against the CIA coup in Guatemala. Weak and in wheelchair, he insisted in go, with the fist closed high. The revolution was his last heartbeat. His last entry in his diary. It was brief, but moving. I joyfully await my departure and hope never to return. Never. Frida's funeral was held in the Palace of Fine Arts, the most important cultural institution, prestigious in Mexico. Her body, wrapped on the flag red of the Mexican Communist Party, was veiled by friends, family, artists, and revolutionaries. Diego Rivera was heartbroken. He called her the great love of my life. Even though her betrayals, they had almost devastated. But in the years after her death, something extraordinary happened. Frida Kahlo refused to disappear. At first, the name was only whispered in the circles artistic. His works were difficult to categorize. Two policies for the surreal, too much surreal for the traditionalists. But little by little, their image, their history, and its challenge, they began to resonate. During the decades of the 1900s, 70,980 custom made that academics and activists, feminists, they recovered forgotten voices. Frida's became further strong. It was no longer just a painter. She was a symbol of grief turned in beauty, from feminism born from resistance, from unapologetically celebrated Mexican identity, from queer identity, disability, revolution, and authenticity. Her face, her unibrow, his look, the flowers in his hair turned iconic. His house became in a museum, his diary in a text sacred, and his paintings now hang in the museum's further important figures in the world. Frida Kahlo lived much of her life in Diego's shadow, but upon his death, he stepped forward. He didn't just leave paintings, he left a mirror in us. She challenged everyone to look at her, not with pity, nor with fear, but with passion. Today, Frida Kahlo's face is in everywhere, printed in t-shirts, painted on murals, converted in dolls, memes, posters, and icons. Its characteristic unibrow, his hair crowned with flowers, his look direct, everything instantly recognizable. But what does powerful his legacy is not just that people get to know her face, but that acknowledges the truth that hides after he. Frida didn't try to be perfect. She didn't fit in molds. It wasn't conventional, and she didn't care to be so. In a world that demands perfection, she always gave authenticity. Raw, messy, vibrant, angry, joyful, contradictory reality. She celebrated what made her different. His disability, his homosexuality, his politics, its culture, and turned it in art that it came to light borders and decades. It has become in further that she is an artist and a global symbol of defiance, feminism, cultural pride, and resilience. Creative. For queer communities, she is a fearless bisexual icon that lived openly and without complexes. in a time that demanded silence. For women, it's a reminder that power does not require permission. For the artists with disabilities are proof that the pain can feed brush. Don't stop it. And for Mexico, it's a daughter. Recovered, fierce, folkloric, and forever part of the national soul. Her paintings, a time discarded as too much strange or too personal, are now among the most revered by the world. Works such as Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird and The Broken Column are not just seen, they are felt deeply. Any that has suffered and have needy transform that suffering in something sacred. She lived in the margins and the converted in center of attention. She embraced contradiction, a communist. She was dressed in gold, a woman betrayed that returned to true love, a body in pieces with an unbreakable soul. And despite everything, she painted, not only with color, but with conviction. Frida Kahlo never, he asked to be a symbol. Simply, he told the truth about herself. And in doing so, she spoke the truth to millions of people who they had never been reflected before in her art. Now, when we see his face, courage, we see color, we see resistance. We see Frida not as disappeared, but immortal.